Hello and welcome to the App Clinic. My name is Reto Meyer and I'm the tech lead on the Android Developer Relations team. And today I'll be designing the ultimate cricket tracking app for Android. If you're wondering why I'm not joined by my usual co-host Ian Lewis, well, despite 4 hours of excruciating training, Ian still can't reliably determine an LBW decision without referencing both Hotspot and Hawkeye. And even then, half the time he'll forget to check the pitched outside leg. So rather than subject him to the written examination on the Duckworth-Lewis method, I've decided to host today's App Clinic solo. Now, I'm the sort of person who considers Pictionary a torture roughly in line with waterboarding, so the focus of my design will center on architecture. I'll be using apps that let you follow cricket scores to provide some context, but the same techniques and approaches will work just as well for a range of apps, particularly other sports like baseball or any code of football, whether that's throwing, kicking, catching, a round, or any other shaped ball. Now, fair warning, I took many of these screenshots during day 2 and 3 of the second Ashes test, so any members of the Australian Test squad suffering from PTSD should look away. As engineers, it can be tempting to start designing our apps in terms of the data we have access to, then considering how to display that data. Instead of building the ultimate hammer and then packaging it in a shiny box, invest some time examining the problem as a user without considering how you'd go about solving it. So let's take a look at the problems the existing apps already solve. Cricinfo is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year, and they've always been my go-to site for following the cricket. What I really like about their mobile app is that the info you're most likely to want, live match scores, is front and center. Swiping left and right allows you to move between all of the different currently live matches. Beyond that, everything else, fixtures, news, video, etc., are all within easy reach directly from the front page. CricBuzz takes a similar approach to live scores, but has limited the front page to a list view of current news articles. The other content is still available, but they've moved it off the main UI and into this navigation spinner. Now, I actually prefer this approach in general, as it makes the app landing page a little less cluttered. So in terms of solving problems, we can see that both apps are providing live scores, upcoming fixtures, cricket news, photo galleries, and access to the rich world of cricket statistics. In terms of priorities, the focus of both apps is live scores, so let's dive in here a little deeper. When you select a live match in Cricinfo, you're shown this standard score summary. It shows the current inning score, the batsman, bowler, and even the last few balls from the current and previous innings. Below all of that, we have our commentary. Now, like the landing page, everything is available by interacting directly with the UI. You can swipe or click these icons to move between the summary score, full score, commentary, and news views. Clicking on a particular player will take you to their stats page. Now, this is really the heart of the app, and they've done a great job of fitting a lot of information into a small area. CricBuzz has a very similar match score display, but it's moved the navigation into the overflow menu. They've also incorporated a couple of really cool features. Specifically, they've got score tracking and live audio commentary. Now, I actually think audio commentary is a big enough feature that it deserves promotion right to the action bar. Now, note that both of these apps have used a refresh button. Now, a big part of my architectural redesign is going to talk about how to eliminate the refresh button from apps like this. Things like a refresh button are a great example of how implementation can sometimes drive visual design. As engineers, we need a way to call the method that initiates the downloads, and then you add a visual control whose event handler triggers that method, right? Well, no. If you start with your idealized visual design, you wouldn't include a refresh button. You'd just make sure that the scores were always up to date. Much like a save button, why would I ever not want to save my work? Now, just because you have a save method doesn't mean you need to have a save control on screen. And it's the same thing with refresh. Now, I never start a project without sketching out my UI, and I can't draw for love or money, but this is really an important place to start. By defining the user experience early, you add useful constraints around what your app needs to do and how it needs to do it. That clarity is what lets you build something that's targeted to solving real problems rather than a collection of features you build because you could. Now, I took those raw sketches and used the design guidelines to try and put together some mocks that sort of had that simple and consistent feel in line with the Android visual language. In addition to the two apps that we just looked at, I also took some inspiration from the ABC's Cricket site, which is a really clean design without being too Spartan. So I've really tried to sort of merge those philosophies. Now, I'm clearly no designer, but for today's App Clinic, I've at least taken my pencil sketches and turned them into some primitive mocks for us to look at. For the real deal, the Android Design and Action team are going to transform them into real mocks for next week's show. So this is the first of the mocks. I think it's important to remember that a lot of developers can get lost in the weeds of potential of what their app could do. So we get so caught up in what we think we might be able to build in the long term that we lose sight of why we built the app in the first place. So my guiding principle for software design, both visual and architectural, is to focus on the simplest way of providing the most important information. And I do that by asking, why has someone downloaded this app? And the easiest way of answering that question is to ask it yourself. Why would I download this app? Now for me, it was to track the scores of the Ashes tests. So like Cricinfo and CricBuzz, when you open the app, you get the live scores for all of the ongoing matches front and center, and you can swipe to transition between them. For the remaining space, I was tossing up between displaying either just all kinds of news or upcoming fixtures. And to make a choice, I tried to imagine the user experience based on someone's intention when opening the app for the first time when downloading, or even once it's installed every time that they open the app. Now, if you're checking for an upcoming match, that takes exactly however long it takes for you to find the match that you're trying to look for. Now, that's a fixed time cost that's entirely dependent on my implementation, on how long it takes for you to get to that point within the app. Now, if you open the app to read cricket news, the time cost is variable, and it's dependent on how much time the user wants to spend reading the news. So the time taken to navigate to news is really only an incremental additional time cost on top of the time that they were already planning to spend reading. So by displaying fixtures, we're removing time from a critical part of one of those user interactions. Now, for navigation to other features, I've actually gone with a sliding drawer, mainly because it's the new hotness, but also because I think it's a really elegant solution to navigating around a lot of heterogeneous content. Now, this is the case for an app like this where you have a lot of different features which could theoretically each be separate apps, but they've been bundled together for convenience or because they're thematically similar. So a navigation drawer, a sliding drawer, is a really neat way of being able to have that sort of meta layer on top. Now really all of this is window dressing for the real money, the live match display. Now, following the same principles of focus, I've tried to keep the match activity as simple as I can. You land on this score summary, where I've used country flags to add a little bit of visceral reaction, something that only a national flag seems to be able to evoke. Now the commentary is immediately below, and the whole thing is just a vertically scrolling list view. Now you can do swiping horizontally, and that will switch between the summary view, the full score view, or related news based on that match. So we've got a two-dimensional scroll which will let you either change the content that you're displaying or the content within that view. Same as the other two apps we looked at, clicking on a particular player will take you to their stats page, and clicking on a country will take you to a country page, which is going to include stats, recent results, and upcoming fixtures. Now, any sport that includes 5-match series that last 5 days each is going to produce a lot of statistics, and any sport that includes an afternoon tea break is going to give you a lot of opportunities to delve into those stats. Now, in this tablet mock-up, I've tried to give an idea of the sort of space you've got available when optimizing for tablets. Now, to me, it seems obvious that you're going to want to drop the summary and other list views over here on the left-hand side, and then you've got almost 2/3 of the remaining display space as prime real estate to do things like commentary, player stats, not to mention even more detailed things like match statistics, player versus player breakdowns, a multitude of graphs, and of course even the possibility of adding things like Hawkeye directly within the tablet experience. Now, the mobile phone app is an ideal way to keep track of a series or a match, but done the right way, a tablet app actually introduces the opportunity to deliver a true cricket companion that gives you an immersive experience that's richer and more easily accessible than the information already available on the web. Now, we already know that users spend more time in apps on tablets, So creating a rich tablet experience is a great opportunity to drive that deeper user engagement. Now, the last feature I want to talk about from my visual mockups is starring a match. Now, starring is a pretty well understood metaphor in Android that's generally associated with bookmarking something or marking something as important. Now, within my app, I'm going to take it as an explicit signal that the user is interested in this match, and as an implicit signal that she might be interested in one or more of the teams or even the location where the match is being played. Now, we can use this information in a number of ways. First, by adding a shortcut to starred matches directly from our navigation drawer, but also as a way of enabling notifications for match events. Now, by default, I'm going to trigger a notification for every heartbreaking wicket, every change of innings, and every merciful stumps for every match that has been starred. And I will include a flag within the settings menu to let users deselect any of those particular match events. Now, the notification itself should show everything related to that event. So the inning score, the wicket details, and when you expand the notification, the commentary associated. Ideally, you shouldn't have to click on the notification to enter the app to be able to understand the full context around the event that has triggered it. Now, there's a range of actions that you can associate with each notification. Anything from links to the video clip to sharing the data, or even an option to cancel further notifications for the remainder of the game when it all just becomes too depressing. Now, the real trick is making sure that these notifications are timely but don't drain the battery. And that's really the underlining philosophy behind my entire design. Moving beyond the visual design, we need to create an information architecture that will let us bring these mocks to life. Now, we need to consider three factors in our software design. What do we need to show? When do we need to update what we're showing? And how do we perform these updates efficiently? Now, fundamentally, the answers to those questions are pretty simple. Show users what they're expecting to see. Do updates as often as you need to, but don't do updates if they're not necessary. And perform them using a combination of Google Cloud Messaging, sync adapters, and the Volley library. And of course, you want to do all of that in a way that makes it look as though it's happening by magic. Now, I'll forgive you for thinking that those answers are a little simplistic, and certainly I understand that a simple design can look very different once you've implemented it in the real world. So before we dive in, let's take a look at a few simple techniques we can use to add a little bit of magic. We're going to do that by offering some features which I think users will appreciate but probably weren't expecting. Now, when we looked at CricBuzz, I mentioned that their live commentary option is a big enough deal that it should get promoted to the action bar directly, but what if you don't have access to a live audio stream? Fear not, you can take advantage of Android's text-to-speech library to create your own dynamic commentary. This is a massive feature for folks like me who want to follow a match while I'm driving to and from work. In fact, you can take this a step further and include an option to automatically trigger dynamic commentary when the user is driving, using the new location-based services activity detection APIs. But of course, the real magic comes from an app that seems to have been built especially for you, and that means showing you exactly what you expect to see. Now, when you open the app to the landing page, there's likely to be several cricket matches being played, including tests, one-dayers, 2020, domestic and international. So how do you make sure that the match I downloaded the app to track is the first one displayed in this list? Now, at I/O last year, I talked a lot about context and taking advantage of what your phone knows about you to create a personalized experience that will make your app feel as though it was custom built for each of your users. So how do we find out what match each user wants to watch without asking them first? Well, for a start, we can assume that the teams involved in a starred match are likely to be of interest. Similarly, we can keep track of which matches a user has watched. Over time, we should be able to see a pattern to understand which teams or which grounds a user is interested in the games of. But that doesn't help us the first time that the app is opened. And for that, we need to be a little bit sneakier. So let's start with the most obvious. Check where they are using location-based services. Request the course location permission and then reverse geocode their last known location to figure out which country they're in. You can even go a step further and figure out which state or province they're in to understand which domestic side that they're likely interested in. But I live in the US, so that's really not going to work. So what else can we try? Well, another good signal is the locale that the device is configured to. It's a strong signal, but my device doesn't let me choose an Australian locale. Well, if I asked you what the score was on the cricket, you'd assume I was interested in Australia, and it's not just because I'm a masochist, but because I have an unmistakable Aussie accent. Now, it turns out that the Android voice recognition lets you select your accent as well as your language. So using this code, you can see which language variation has been selected. Boom! Now you can use my accent as a way to guess which country I support. And suddenly you've got the opportunity to customize the UI for me and put the Aussie matches right at the top of the list. Now, this might seem like a lot of work for a fairly trivial modification, but now, the first time I open your app, there's a very good chance that I'll be presented with the exact match that I downloaded this app in order to find out the score for. And that's a really powerful positive signal that I've done the right thing, that I've downloaded the right app, that the person who developed it is on the same wavelength as me. Other ways we can find out what people are interested in. We can take advantage of Google Plus integration. And we can use the explicitly and implicitly tracked teams from our friends to help inform the app of the matches that we are likely to be interested in. And as a bonus, by using Google Plus Sign-In, you can now synchronize those starred matches across all of a user's devices. So now we know the matches that your user has indicated that they're definitely interested in and the ones that they're likely to be interested in. So how else can we use that data to improve the performance and usability of our app? Well, we can start by sending it all to your server. Now, this is an important step as it's going to help us ensure that we only perform updates as often as needed to ensure that we can eliminate the refresh button. Now, that means that the data being displayed needs to be constantly up to date. And for sports scores, that means getting updates as soon as they happen, but without wasting bandwidth and battery requesting updates in between overs or during the drinks break. Now, updates are going to fall into two broad categories: background and foreground. And when the app is open and the user is looking at it, they're either going to be browsing, looking at news, stats, upcoming fixtures, and so on, or they're going to be watching a match as it happens. Now, in the latter case, you should be looking to implement the best practices for creating apps that transfer data in battery-efficient ways, so that when they're browsing around your site, they're not draining the battery every time they click a link. Now, I like to call this the big cookie model of data transfers. In real terms, that means minimizing the number of radio state transitions caused by your app transmitting data. To do that, you need to prefetch enough data so as to prevent additional downloads, usually within the next 2 to 5 minutes, without just cheating by downloading everything on your server. Now, typically that's going to look like around 5 megs of data. Now, what you download is whatever you think a user is likely to request within that next 5-minute time window. It's another good opportunity to use those implicitly tracked teams to prefetch commentary for matches that they're likely to observe or which news stories they're likely to read. Prefetched data is available instantly and has zero incremental cost in terms of battery life. So it's generally good practice to be pretty aggressive with what you choose to pull down ahead of time, while all the time being conscious of the associated bandwidth cost. When we do need to transfer data, you'll want to batch all of your transfers together. It's more efficient to transfer a lot of data at once rather than spreading it out over time. So if you need to pull down commentary for a new match, you should take that as an opportunity to preempt your next batch of prefetched news stories and score updates. The easiest way to do this is by bundling all of your transfers together within a sync adapter. Then within each of these methods, you can make a more fine-grained choice regarding what data you actually want to transfer each time the sync adapter is called. Now, for example, fixtures, you probably don't need to be updating them more than once a day, whereas news headlines will likely want to be much more frequent. Now, when it comes to real-time updates, there's a temptation to set up a timer that just pings your server for an update every minute while your app is in the foreground. And certainly that's an approach that I took years ago, back in the days of Google Desktop. Before I knew better, I wrote myself a widget that tracked scores on Cricinfo by scraping a particular page every minute. It was perfect. While the match was ongoing, I got those constant ball-by-ball updates. Unfortunately, it had a bug that included a race condition, which, when triggered, meant that the widget missed the end of a match. So it would get a 404, but would keep pinging the site over and over, every minute of every hour of every day. It was only brought to my attention when the company's tech ops folks wondered why I was downloading 1.25 gig of data every week for a month while I was on holiday. So regular updates, foreground or background, need to be carefully managed. In fact, foreground updates are really just a special case of background updates, one which happens much more frequently. So let's take a look at how they can work together. And we'll start by taking a closer look at the background update case. Now, we have starred updates for which we want notifications. We have implicitly tracked teams for which we want to do regular updates to keep the app fresh, and updates on fixtures and stats that probably only need to happen once a day. You may even argue that only starred matches need to be updated in the background, but personally I think that there's value in keeping the app up to date even when it's not running, as long as we can do so in a way that doesn't drain the battery. If you do it right, you minimize latency at startup, you can make sure that the app is still useful even if you don't have connectivity right when you open it. So, like the visual design, I start my update architecture with pen and paper. Now, this design translates into this flowchart. So let's step through it, and we'll start with our starred matches. Now, these are the games our users have explicitly marked as important, and for whom we're delivering notifications while that app is in the background. Now, matches that are being observed while in the foreground, for which we want to have those real-time updates, they fit into the same category. For those updates, both the foreground and background case, we're going to rely entirely on Google Cloud Messaging. We'll set a flag on the server to decide whether we want to have every ball updates or if we just want significant events like wickets or end of innings. But rather than just sending a push message notifying the client of a pending update, we can just send the entire update within the GCM payload. Now, every GCM message can contain up to 4K of data. One over's worth of commentary is typically around 1K, so you can safely send the commentary for each ball of an observed match, or the details of a fallen wicket, including the commentary for the background notifications. Now, the result is a significantly decreased latency for those updates and a simpler, more efficient update implementation where you're not having to figure out how to modify the timing of your update based on the current state of the match, and you're never doing updates more frequently than you need to. Now, for matches that we aren't actively tracking, we can use Google Cloud Messaging to tickle the client when there are updates related to the teams we implicitly track. Now, we don't want to initiate an update for every new news update or new fixture or new match for teams we aren't actively tracking. So we can prioritize prefetching information related to the teams we think are the most relevant to our users. Now, given that the data is changing on the server, it again makes sense for these updates to be driven from the server side using GCM. But we can make them even more efficient by having the client influence the frequency with which we actually receive these updates. Now, I like to implement a usage backoff pattern backed by a sync adapter. So every time we perform a redundant update, defined as 2 updates that happen in between the app being closed and being reopened, we double the amount of time that we wait before we perform the next background update. Now, that same approach will work either by changing the frequency of a periodic sync set for a sync adapter, or by setting a flag on the server for each of those client updates to say how frequently we should be performing those tickles. The update itself will be performed by triggering a sync adapter in exactly the same way as it should happen when the app is opened. And you want to get that fresh data when the user starts browsing. Now, alternatively, or additionally, you can use further context to modify the background updates and browsing prefetch rates of your application. For example, a user standing still browsing the app is much more likely to browse for longer than one who is walking around. So you can use activity detection to increase the prefetch amount or the frequency of prefetches based on the fact that they're standing still. Similarly, you can use the tilting activity to determine when to initiate daily updates like fixture changes every morning when the user picks up their device, rather than specifying an arbitrary time. Finally, there's one more piece of magic that we can build which sits at the confluence of background updates and implicitly tracked teams. Series notifications. So by tracking the teams that we think users are interested in, we can send them infrequent notifications to alert them of significant events related to a particular team. This can be a really effective way to help drive engagement by reminding people to use your app. but it's important to be very careful not to become spammy. I'd recommend only sending notifications once per series. It would be great to know that the Ashes is about to begin, but I don't necessarily want to be told every single match that Australia is playing. Now, it may even make sense to add a stop these notifications action to the notification itself, or go the other way and perhaps include an action to star every match in that series so they get one prompt and are then able to opt in or opt out of getting further notifications. So we've covered all the technologies already, but let's quickly review the technologies that we should be using to perform all of these updates. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail because I've already been talking for a very long time, but I'll share some of the resources that you can use to find out how to implement what I've been talking about. So everything in this design is driven from your server, with Google Cloud Messaging either transmitting the data directly or initiating a sync adapter update through tickling the client. The Google Cloud Messaging APIs are described in detail at developers.android.com/google/GCM, and you can find out lots of detail on implementing sync adapters in this new Android training class on transferring data using sync adapters. For populating list views, particularly useful for things like news, you can use Volley, which you can find out all about from Ficus Kirkpatrick's awesome I/O talk from earlier this year. One of the challenges of having server-generated notifications based on matches that you're syncing across multiple devices is avoiding spamming your users with the same notifications on their phone and on their tablet, or if you're someone like me, on 4 of their phones and 7 of their tablets. Now, one of the great new features in Google Cloud Messaging is user notifications, which is part of the Upstream Messaging API. It's available through Google Play Services. Now, this API lets you send a message to other instances of your application. So if you dismiss a notification on one device, you're able to send a notification to the client running on every other device that notification is no longer relevant and it will disappear. And this is something you can see in the latest version of Google Calendar. You can find out more details from Francesco Nieri's I/O talk from earlier this year, where he went into a lot of detail on Google Cloud Messaging and how you can use it within your app. Now, that was a lot of information to digest in a relatively short period of time. I hope you enjoyed this slightly different take on the App Clinic. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. In the meantime, I'll leave you with these key points. The refresh button is dead. Google Cloud Messaging allows you to eliminate all unnecessary transfers while maintaining those low latency updates. The transfers themselves should all be handled by the sync adapter, which is not only efficient but also handles things like connectivity changes to make sure your transfers always get through. Context, anything from your user's location to their accent, can help provide those magical touches that will cause people to fall in love with your apps. And if you're an Australian cricket fan, it's probably best to avoid installing any of these apps for at least the next 6 to 12 months. Thank you for joining us this week on the App Clinic. Check out developers.google.com/live/Android or the Android Dev YouTube channel to find out more about our upcoming episodes of this and other Android developer shows. My name is Reto Meier.